December 21, 1944. Apennine Mountains, northern Italy. The wind screamed through the black pines like an old train dragging its brakes. Snow drifted sideways in fine, sharp grains that stung the skin and clung to cloth until every man looked carved from frost. Corporal Isaac Merrick lay belly down in the ruins of a stone farmhouse halfway up a ridge overlooking the valley. The structure had no roof, only jagged walls and a chimney that leaned like a gravestone. It was perfect. Broken enough to hide in, solid enough to die behind. Below him, a single road wound through fog so dense it looked alive. Somewhere beyond that grey wall, German mountain troops were moving. Quiet, methodical, invisible. The men of the 10th Mountain Division had been told the front was quiet tonight. Command called it a holding sector. But the silence pressing against Merrick's ears wasn't peace. It was breath held before a scream. He checked his wristwatch, 01:43 hours. The second hand trembled in the cold. Beside him, Private Leo Hart, 19, Kansas-born farm boy, shivered under a torn blanket, his eyes red from the wind. He muttered, "We shouldn't even be out here. Lieutenant said visibility's 0. Merrick didn't look away from his rifle. Visibility's only 0 if you're blind. Hart glanced toward him, confused, then noticed the strange contraption fixed to Merrick's Springfield M1903. The scope shimmered faintly. A crude metal ring cut from a dented canteen, bound with copper wire, its inner glass glowing with a pale green hue. Hart whispered, "That thing's going to get you court-martialed." "Maybe," Merrick said. "But it might also keep us alive." He adjusted the scope again, exhaled, and let his world narrow to a circle of ghostly light. Through it, he could just make out shapes moving where there should have been nothing. Faint heat halos sliding through the fog. "Movement. 200 yards," Merrick murmured. Hart froze. "You're seeing things. Nobody moves in this cold." Merrick's finger hovered above the trigger. "They are. 3 at least, maybe more. Orders are no engagement. We radio in and wait for daylight." The corporal's whisper cut him off. "By daylight, they'll be behind our line." He saw them clearer now. Dark figures hunched beneath the moon-washed mist, their boots leaving no sound on frozen mud. German Gebirgsjäger scouts. Their white snow smocks blended perfectly with the ground, invisible to unaided eyes. Merrick steadied the rifle on a brick ledge, every muscle locked. His breath fogged the eyepiece. The faint phosphorescence from his lens caught a glint of metal. An MP-4 submachine gun slung low. Confirmation. "Jesus," Hart hissed. "You can actually see them." "Keep your voice down," Merrick said. "They can't see us yet." The moon broke through for half a minute, flooding the valley with silver light that glowed against the fog like spilled mercury. It illuminated the road just long enough for Merrick to see what the Germans carried. Demolition packs and signal flares. Hart whispered, "Engineers, they're gonna hit the bridge." Merrick didn't answer. He was counting breaths, 5 in, 2 out. The same pattern his father had taught him when grinding lenses back in Chicago. Patience, precision, stillness. He whispered, "Wind's dead. 240 yards. Uphill advantage 4 degrees. Hart frowned. "What are you doing?" "Ending a mistake before it begins." He pressed his cheek to the stock, the cold wood biting through his skin. His pulse slowed. The lens glimmered faintly, capturing what the moon offered, bending it through the scavenged glass until every movement below shimmered like slow lightning. Crack! The rifle's report shattered the valley. Through the fog, one of the white shapes folded and disappeared. The others hesitated, a fatal second of disbelief. Then chaos erupted. Muffled shouts in German, boots slipping, weapons raised blindly toward the ridge. Hart grabbed the radio. "Command's gonna kill us!" "Better them angry than dead," Merrick muttered. A second shot, then a third. The echoes tangled between the mountains. each louder than the last. Through his outlawed Canteen lens, Merrick could see everything. The panic, the confusion, the fear. He wasn't guessing. He was seeing. The dark had become his ally. Hart swore under his breath, crouched lower. They'll triangulate us. Merrick chambered another round. Let them. They can't shoot what they can't find. The next volley from the Germans went high, spraying sparks off rock and stone. The ridge lit with tracer fire that cut red lines through the mist. Merrick stayed calm, moving only enough to reload. Each breath, each shot, a rhythm. Artillery of precision. Then, silence again. The kind that hums inside the bones after adrenaline drains away. Merrick waited, eyes still fixed through the glass. The valley was empty except for the fog and the faint shapes now lying still within it. Hart finally exhaled. How did you even see them? Merrick lowered his rifle, eyes distant. The moon showed me. Hart blinked. Through that thing. Through what nobody else was looking at. He dismantled the rifle quietly, wrapped the lens in cloth, and tucked it inside his coat. The faint green glow faded, swallowed by the dark. Somewhere down the valley, the wind changed. It carried the first hints of smoke and cordite from a bridge that would never be blown, from men who would never report back to their unit. Hart looked at Merrick. You just broke every order in the book. Merrick nodded once. And saved everyone sleeping on the other side of that ridge. They gathered their gear in silence. The fog began to rise again, erasing footprints, covering bodies, smoothing everything into white. By dawn, the official report would say, minor enemy contact, no casualties, no mention of the lens, no mention of what Merrick had seen through stolen moonlight, but history would remember the night the darkness itself turned traitor. Chicago, Illinois, winter 1932. The smell of ground glass and oil had a way of clinging to the walls. 10-year-old Isaac Merrick sat cross-legged under his father's workbench, a magnifying lens in one hand and a piece of broken bottle glass in the other. The sound of grinding wheels filled the tiny optics shop. Outside, the L trains rattled and screamed through the freezing night, but inside, it was the hum of creation, the song of patience and light. His father, Samuel Merrick, was a quiet man with steady hands and eyes that missed nothing. He'd once apprenticed under German lensmakers in Dresden before the Great War interrupted his craft. He used to say, "You can't force light to behave, Isaac. You coax it. You bend it where it wants to go." Isaac learned early that vision wasn't just about seeing. It was about understanding how others see and why they miss what's right in front of them. During the Depression, the shop barely survived. Samuel fixed spectacles for $50 or traded work for bread. Isaac helped polish frames, his fingers raw from the grit. But when business was slow, they experimented, building small telescopes from scrap metal, testing magnifiers, and melting glass in makeshift molds. Those moments, the soft glow of lamplight on curved glass, the quiet joy when a blurry image suddenly sharpened, that's where Isaac learned that clarity wasn't given. It was made. 1939. The world caught fire. Isaac had just turned 20. He'd earned a partial scholarship to the Illinois Institute of Technology to study optical engineering. Then came Poland, France, and London under siege. He watched the newsreels at the Avalon Theatre on 63rd Street. Endless columns of German soldiers, cities reduced to ash, searchlights cutting across night skies. He'd whisper to himself, "They're fighting shadows." After Pearl Harbor, he walked straight to the recruitment office. The clerk glanced at his file. "Occupation?" "Optician." The clerk smirked. "We'll make you an infantryman. The Army's got plenty of eyes, son." Camp Hale, Colorado, 1942. Training at 10,000 feet in the Rockies stripped a man down to what he really was. Thin air, steep slopes, and nights so cold your sweat froze before it hit the ground. Isaac took to the mountains differently than most. Where others cursed the blizzards, he studied the way light refracted through ice crystals. When others complained of glare, he experimented with soot on his goggles to reduce reflection. His commanding officer, Sergeant Halverson, called him Professor, not kindly. "Merrick, this ain't a science fair. You do what you're told, not what makes sense to you." But Merrick couldn't help himself. He modified the reticle on his rifle scope to improve focus in the cold. He applied wax from his rations to waterproof the lens. He filed a report suggesting tinted filters for snow glare. It was dismissed as unnecessary deviation. He didn't care. He wasn't disobedient. He was curious. When he finally made the 10th Mountain Division's marksmanship trials, his scores were the highest in 3 companies. He could hit a steel helmet at 400 yards in crosswind. But his instructors noted something else. He didn't aim where the target was. He aimed where it would be. That instinct made him dangerous and unpredictable. Spring 1944. Deployment to Italy. The 10th Mountain Division landed in Naples under grey skies. Italy was mud, misery and ruin. By then, Merrick's easy confidence had hardened into discipline. He was still the professor, still the quiet one polishing lenses when others played cards, still muttering equations about distance and curvature no one understood. But his squad mates had learned something. His crazy ideas worked. Private Hart remembered the first time Merrick saved him, June 1944, during a patrol near the Arno River. Hart slipped into a drainage trench and nearly got shot by a sniper. Merrick spotted the flash off a rifle scope 300 yards away. From a single glint of sunlight. One shot. Dead center. When Hart asked how he'd seen it, Merrick simply said, "I stopped looking at the hill. I looked at what didn't belong there." That phrase, "look at what doesn't belong," would stay with him the rest of the war. By late autumn, the front had stalled against the German Gothic line. A labyrinth of bunkers, mines, and camouflaged artillery stretching across the Apennine mountains. Command called it the soft underbelly of Europe. The men joked it was steel-plated. Merrick's platoon rotated through outposts near Casteldaiano, where fog rolled like smoke and visibility dropped to arm's length. German snipers haunted the hills, shooting by sound, by instinct. One night, a young lieutenant told him, "You're wasting time cleaning that scope. You can't see 5 feet in this soup." Merrick had stared into the fog, then quietly said, "You can, if you know how light behaves." The lieutenant walked away muttering about insubordination, but every rule he broke, every experiment he tried, came from that same seed planted back in Chicago. The idea that seeing wasn't just vision, it was understanding distortion. He wrote in a notebook he kept tucked inside his coat, "Fog hides nothing. It just makes truth harder to find." When the 10th was ordered to hold a frozen ridgeline through Christmas, Merrick spent his downtime scavenging. Broken mirrors, signal lamps, aircraft lenses from wrecked P-47s. Each night he tinkered by candlelight, melting glass and metal in a mess tin like a man possessed. His comrades laughed. "He's building a telescope to Mars," they said. But Hart noticed something else, the way Merrick's eyes changed when he worked. Focused, calm, a man shaping something the world would one day need. By December 1944, Isaac Merrick was no longer just a soldier. He was a contradiction, a man trapped between science and war, between orders and instinct. He followed rules until they made no sense, and broke them only to save lives. He didn't know it yet, but within weeks, his outlawed idea, born from glass, light and memory, would defy every regulation the US Army held sacred. And when the night came that no one could see, he would be the only one who could. Apennine Mountains, December 1944. There are winters that numb a man. And then there are winters that test what kind of man he truly is. For the soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division, December was not a season, it was an enemy. The wind screamed down from the peaks, carrying frozen sleet that cut skin like razors. The snow swallowed boots, The fog erased landmarks. You could walk 10 yards from camp and vanish. You could die 5 feet from help, and no one would ever find you until spring thaw. The Germans called this stretch of mountain Wolf's Road. The Americans had a less poetic name, the Grey Hell. Every night, German Gebirgsjäger patrols slipped through the fog, their white smocks blending perfectly into snow. They moved like phantoms. Sabotage teams armed with wire cutters, silencers and demolition charges. Their targets, supply trucks, ammunition depots and sleeping men. And they were winning. December 10th, 3 outposts gone in 2 nights. At dawn, Merrick stood with his platoon outside the smouldering wreckage of Outpost Dog, a dozen blackened helmets half buried in frost. He watched medics pull bodies from what used to be the command bunker, men who'd never seen their killers. Lieutenant Donnelly, the kind of officer who lived by the manual, paced in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered. "They can't move that quietly in this weather." Merrick crouched beside a footprint, half filled with snow. The heel had a nail pattern, German Alpine issue. He traced the edges, studying how the fog thickened around it. "They don't move quietly," he said softly. "We just don't see them." Donnelly turned, scowling. "You're saying they're invisible now, Merrick?" "Not invisible, just in the right kind of dark." Donnelly rubbed his temples. "Christ, you sound like you're writing poetry. We'll tighten perimeter patrols, that's all." Merrick wanted to argue, but he'd learned something from his father. You can't convince a man who refuses to see. Back at camp, the mood was brittle. Men played cards to ignore the sound of artillery rolling miles away. Private Hart sat near the fire, tossing a bullet between his fingers. "You ever think the fog's alive?" he asked. Merrick looked up from cleaning his rifle. "Alive?" "Yeah, like it moves where it wants. It knows when to show up." Merrick smirked faintly. "Light behaves the same way. Sometimes it hides what it doesn't want you to see." "Great," Hart said. "Now the light's got feelings too." But the truth sat heavy in Merrick's chest. Every night, the Germans came closer. Every morning, they found more tracks. And every briefing ended the same way. "Hold your fire until daylight. No night engagements." Orders from headquarters, signed by Major Samuel Crane himself. They called it Doctrine of Visibility. The idea, in fog or low light, firing risked friendly fire and wasted ammunition. It made sense on paper. It made men dead in the field. That week, Merrick logged each incident in a small notebook, his handwriting neat despite the cold. Descent 11, 23:15 hours. Sounds of wire cutters near B Company's supply dump. No visual contact. 3 casualties. Dekrantum 12:100 hours. German flares in ravine. Engaged too late. Dekern 13:0240 hours. Fog thick. Suspected movement. Command says negative. He underlined the last line 3 times. Command says negative. When he brought the notes to Donnelly, the lieutenant sighed. "You're wasting ink, Merrick. The brass knows what it's doing." "With respect, sir," Merrick said quietly, "the brass isn't the one watching shadows move uphill." Donnelly jabbed a gloved finger toward him. "And you're not the one writing doctrine. Stick to your orders." That night, Merrick sat alone in his dugout, lamp flickering. He pulled out a small box. Pieces of broken glass, a bent canteen, and a scrap of reflective film. He stared at them, remembering his father's words. "You can't force light. You bend it where it wants to go." Outside, artillery thundered far off, like a storm that never left. Merrick ran his thumb along the metal curve, watching how moonlight distorted across it. The edges glowed faintly where frost formed, bending light into faint silver arcs. He whispered to himself, "Fog doesn't stop light. It scatters it." Hart's voice startled him from the entrance. "You talking to yourself again, Professor?" Merrick smiled faintly. "Just the laws of physics. They argue less." Hart stepped closer, squinting. "What the hell is that?" "Something I'm not supposed to build." 2 days later, word spread that a German infiltration team had wiped out a patrol just north of their position. 5 men, all shot at close range. The commanding officers doubled the guards, posted snipers along the ridges, and repeated the same rule: no engagement at night. That night, Merrick sat watching the fog thicken, the valley swallowing itself whole. He thought of Outpost Dog, of men who died waiting for daylight that never came. The line between orders and conscience blurred. He turned to Hart. If the fog hides them, it can hide us too. Hart frowned. Hide us how? Merrick's eyes were far away. By letting us see first. Hart groaned. That's not English. It will be, Merrick said softly. When I'm done. December 17th. The grey hell deepened. The snow turned to ice, fog thick as smoke, and radio lines failed for hours at a time. Rumours spread that the Germans had equipment that could see in the dark. Some said they used captured Allied lamps. Others swore they saw glows in the mist, like eyes. Fear began to chew at discipline. Men refused night patrols. Some fired at shapes that weren't there. Merrick understood what fear did to the mind, how uncertainty bends perception like a warped lens. He kept his notes, measuring fog density, moonrise times, and light reflection angles. To others, it looked like madness. To him, it was the beginning of an answer. One evening, during chow, Sergeant Halverson, the same man who'd mocked him in training, slammed a tray down beside him. Heard you're still scribbling science experiments instead of sleeping. Merrick didn't look up. Just observations. Halverson sneered. Observations don't kill Krauts, Merrick. Rifles do. Only if you can see them first, Merrick said calmly. Halverson shook his head, muttering, Keep talking like that. They'll ship you home in a straitjacket. But the sergeant's words didn't shake him, because deep down, Merrick already knew what no one else dared admit. The fog wasn't their enemy, their blindness was. That night, when the wind dropped and the mountains fell silent, Merrick unscrewed the cap of his canteen and watched how moonlight bent across its dented surface. He didn't smile. He didn't whisper. He simply began to work. The problem wasn't the dark. The problem was the army's fear of it. And he was going to solve it, even if it meant breaking every rule they had. December 18th, 1944. 19:30 hours. The fog rolled in again, thicker than milk and twice as suffocating. The ridge looked like a dream dissolving into mist. Inside a half-collapsed barn near the forward line, Corporal Isaac Merrick had turned the ruins into his laboratory. His bench was a feed crate, his lamp a flickering oil can with a cotton wick. The tools, a bayonet, a mess tin, and the patience of a man who refused to stop seeing. Private Hart leaned against a beam, chewing on a piece of hardtack. You know, if command finds out you're melting army property again, they're going to hang you with barbed wire. Merrick didn't look up. Then they'd better aim carefully. I see pretty well in the dark now. He was holding a broken canteen over the flame. The metal hissed, warping slowly. Beside it lay a fragment of glass, curved like a tear, from a shattered Jeep headlight. The air smelled of hot metal and paraffin. Every few seconds, he rotated the canteen, checking the light curve it cast on the table. Hart squinted. You're really planning to shoot through that thing? Not through it, Merrick said, eyes steady. With it. He reached for a strip of celluloid, salvaged from a captured German camera, and held it up. See the film layer? It diffuses light, doesn't focus it. That's the trick. Fog scatters high beams. You need spread, not focus. Hart shrugged. You lost me after film. Merrick smiled faintly. Good. That means it's working. He worked through the night, bent metal, cooled it in snow, ground the glass with a stone, melted resin from a pine branch to fuse it. It was primitive, fragile, and, in the army's eyes, dangerous. But when he angled it toward the moonlight outside, it caught something magical. The fog didn't swallow the beam. It shimmered, faint and silver, like the air itself had turned reflective. Merrick whispered, almost reverent, "It's bending it. The Canteen's curve is amplifying it." Hart blinked. "Amplifying moonlight? You sound insane." "Maybe," Merrick said, "but insanity's just persistence that hasn't worked yet." 03, 10 hours. They tested it. Merrick mounted the crude lens onto his Springfield scope with 2 wire bands stripped from a ration crate. The result looked like a drunk engineer's fever dream. Dents, scratches, and globs of hardened resin. He lay prone in the barn's loft, rifle aimed out a hole in the wall. Target: an abandoned fuel drum 250 yards away, faint outline barely visible in the fog. He breathed slow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Through the naked scope, nothing but grey. Through the Canteen lens, a ghostly silhouette, glowing like a spirit in mist. "Range, 250, he whispered. Hart glanced through binoculars. "I can't even see the drum." "Exactly," Merrick muttered. Crack. The shot echoed down the valley. The sound slapped against the ridges and came back delayed, like thunder chasing lightning. They climbed down to check. A single hole punched clean through the fuel drum. Dead center. Hart stared. "You're kidding me." Merrick just smiled. Light doesn't need permission to work. By dawn, the Canteen lens had a name, whispered among his squad. The Ghost Glass. Word spread fast. Men came by to peek at it like a superstition. Even Sergeant Halverson stopped pretending he wasn't curious. "What's that thing do again?" Merrick said evenly. "It lets you see what's about to kill you, before it does." Halverson spat. "Command'll have your ass for this." Merrick looked back at the sergeant and said quietly, "Command doesn't need to know how it works. They just need to know it does." December 19th, 1944. Major Samuel Crane arrived for inspection. A man built from starch and steel, Crane carried himself like doctrine in uniform. He had heard rumours. "Corporal Merrick," Crane began, eyes narrowing at the contraption attached to the sniper rifle. "What is that abomination on government equipment?" "A modification, sir. Light-bending device for low visibility." "Unauthorized?" "Yes, sir." "Effective?" Merrick paused. "Yes, sir." Crane's jaw tightened. "You understand this violates Regulation 84, equipment modification without command approval." "Sir," Merrick cut in, tone respectful but sharp, "regulations don't stop bullets." The major froze. Around them, the camp went quiet. Even the wind seemed to listen. Crane studied him for a long moment, then said, "You're playing a dangerous game, Corporal. You fail once. You're a liability. You succeed once. They'll still call it luck." Then, almost under his breath, "Keep your toy out of sight." That night, Merrick took the major's words as permission, or maybe as a dare. He refined the design, scraped off soot to reduce glare, applied a thin coat of wax to prevent frost build-up, adjusted the curvature by hammering the Canteen rim inside his mess tin. Each tweak brought new clarity. Through the lens, fog wasn't fog anymore. It was texture, depth, movement. He could see what the naked eye couldn't. Warm bodies against cold snow. Breath plumes. The faint shimmer of metal. To him, the world no longer looked like blindness. It looked like opportunity. Late that night, the testing almost got him killed. Hart was on lookout when Merrick decided to range test the device again. He spotted faint motion near the tree line, assumed it was a mule patrol returning from resupply. Through the lens, though, the shapes moved too smoothly, too low. "Not ours," Merrick whispered. Before Hart could react, A burst of German MG fire tore through the barn wall. Splinters exploded around them. The lamp shattered. Merrick rolled behind a stone trough, reloading by feel. "They're scouting again." "How many?" Hart shouted. "4, maybe 5. Can you see them?" "Yes. Can you?" Hart peeked out, saw nothing but fog. "No." "Good," Merrick muttered, lifting his rifle. "That's the point." 3 shots later, the firing stopped. They waited in silence for 20 minutes. When they finally emerged, they found 3 German scouts dead, each hit through the chest, each clutching wire cutters and grenades. Hart stared. "You shouldn't be alive." Merrick brushed snow from his scope. "Neither should they." The report went up the chain, labelled enemy contact repelled during night infiltration, visibility poor. No mention of the lens, no mention of the defiance. But in the silence afterward, something shifted. Hart stopped teasing him. Halverson stopped sneering. Even Donnelly, the rulebook lieutenant, watched him differently. Men who once mocked him now watched the horizon when he spoke. That evening, as he cleaned the lens with the care of a jeweller, Hart asked, "What are you going to call that thing?" Merrick smiled faintly. "A mistake." "Why?" "Because no one ever questions a mistake that saves them." He tucked the lens inside a cloth pouch and set it beside his rifle. Outside, the moon was rising over the Apennines. Cold, sharp, indifferent. It poured silver light across the ridge, and for the first time, Merrick felt like he could see the war itself. Not as chaos, but as contrast. December 20th, 1944. Dusk. The sun didn't set that night. It sank, swallowed by a grey so thick it erased the horizon. The snow stopped falling hours ago, but the silence it left behind was worse. Camp Hill 641 was quiet. Too quiet. Men smoked in pairs, faces half lit by the red glow of cigarettes, their words turning to steam. The distant artillery that had been the soundtrack of winter was gone. Even the wind held its breath. Merrick felt it in his bones, the kind of silence that only comes before something bad. Private Hart was sharpening his knife by lantern light. "Feels like the whole mountain's listening," he said. "It is," Merrick replied. "It's waiting." Earlier that afternoon, Lieutenant Donnelly had gathered the platoon inside a stone hut for a briefing. The maps on the table were marked with thick red lines. "Intel reports German movement east of our position," Donnelly said, voice too casual to hide the tension. "Could be a diversion, could be nothing. Battalion wants us on overwatch until daylight." Hart frowned. "That's what they said before outpost, dog." Donnelly shot him a look. "That's enough." Merrick leaned closer to the map. "They'll use the same approach. Fog after midnight, moonlight around 2. That's when they move." Donnelly gave a tight smile. "And what do you suggest we do? Fire blind into the dark? You know the regulations." Merrick met his eyes. "I know the dead don't care about regulations." The room went still. No one spoke for a moment, until Donnelly muttered, "We do this by the book." The meeting ended like all the others, with unease, and with Merrick more convinced the book was wrong. That night, Merrick sat alone, cleaning his rifle, in the observation post. A stone shell perched above the valley. The world below looked drowned in smoke. Somewhere down there were men in white smocks, whispering in a language he didn't need to hear to understand. He opened his small notebook. The latest entry read, "They move when the moon lifts. They trust our blindness more than their camouflage." He looked up at the thin crescent of moon breaking through the fog and whispered, "Not tonight." 21 hours. Major Crane arrived with a small convoy, inspecting defences before the storm hit. He found Merrick outside the bunker, staring into nothing. "Still tinkering with your miracle?" Crane asked. Merrick nodded toward the valley. "You ever notice how quiet it gets before an avalanche?" Crane smirked. "You think the Germans are an avalanche now?" "No, sir," Merrick said. I think they're the wind that starts it. Crane studied him, something between respect and warning in his eyes. You're not the first man to think he's smarter than his orders. They don't last long. Merrick didn't look away. They don't have to. Just long enough to make a difference. Crane exhaled sharply, almost smiling. You know, you'd make a fine officer if you weren't such a pain in the arse. Then, quieter. Keep your head down tonight, Corporal. Something's moving out there. 22:45 hours. Fog rolled back in. Heavier, wetter, denser. It crawled across the snow like smoke from an unseen fire. The sentries' voices faded to whispers. The sound of boots crunching gravel was replaced by the soft drip of melting frost. Inside their observation post, Merrick and Hart checked gear in silence. Hart's hands shook as he loaded rounds. If they hit tonight, we can't call for artillery. Radio's been dead since afternoon. Then it's just us, Merrick said, adjusting his scope. Hart glanced at the canteen lens. You sure that thing's gonna hold? It already has. You sure it's not gonna blow our position again? Merrick smiled faintly. If they see us, it means we already saw them first. At 23:10, distant metallic clicks echoed from the valley. Hart froze. You hear that? Wire cutters, Merrick said instantly. 200 yards, maybe less. Hart reached for the radio, then stopped himself. Orders are to observe. Merrick watched the mist, faint shadows moving where no moonlight should reach. Observations over. He crawled to the firing slit, adjusted the lens and peered through. At first, nothing. Only haze, then shapes. Dozens. They were moving in squads, low and disciplined, carrying long tubes, satchel charges and flamethrowers. Hart's whisper trembled. That's a full platoon. Closer to a company, Merrick said. They're hitting us before dawn. Hart shook his head. Donnelly said wait for daylight. Donnelly's not looking through this lens. Merrick's pulse was steady, but his thoughts raced. He could see their objective, the bridge at the valley floor, and beyond it, the supply depot housing enough ammunition to keep the front alive for weeks. If it fell, the line would collapse. He thought of Outpost Dog, of men strangled in their sleep because someone had followed orders. He whispered to himself, never again. Hart turned to him. Say again? Nothing, Merrick said. Get on the wire. Wake Donnelly. Hart hesitated. You're not supposed to. Now! Hart sprinted for the field phone, slipping on the icy floor. Merrick stayed at the slit, tracking movement. His eyes burned from the strain, but the lens revealed everything. The shimmer of German helmets, the glint of steel, the rhythmic breathing of men who believed the fog was their ally. It wasn't anymore. 00:05 hours. Lieutenant Donnelly burst into the bunker, boots crunching. What the hell are you doing, Merrick? Look. Merrick handed him the rifle. Donnelly squinted through the lens. I don't see. Wait. He froze. Figures. Dozens of them. Moving exactly where Merrick said they would. Christ almighty, Donnelly muttered. How? The moonlight bends through the fog, Merrick explained quickly. Their heat's making a halo around them. It's primitive, but it works. Donnelly looked from the lens to Merrick, to the valley below. Orders say no engagement. If we wait for daylight, we'll be dead by sunrise. Donnelly hesitated, then said quietly, You know I can't authorize this. I'm not asking for authorization. Outside, the fog shifted again. A whisper of wind revealed just enough. Dark forms crawling closer. Hart whispered, They're 50 yards out. Merrick's finger hovered above the trigger. Once I fire, it's done. No turning back. Hart swallowed hard. You sure? Merrick didn't blink. They think darkness protects them. Let's prove them wrong. Foreshadowing sequence. The lens glowed faintly under the moon, like an eye opening in the dark. Merrick steadied his rifle. His breath slowed. In his mind, he heard his father's voice. You can't force light to behave. You coax it. Outside, A wolf howled, long, low, and lonely. The fog pulsed with motion. He exhaled. Time to coax it. Crack! The first shot ripped the silence apart, and history stopped following orders. December 21st, 1944. Joe won 37 hours. The valley of Castigliano was alive with ghosts. Fog pressed low, glowing faintly where moonlight struck the ice. Every tree looked like a man, every shadow like a threat. The world had gone still enough to hear boots crunching snow 200 yards away. Corporal Isaac Merrick adjusted the canteen lens, its edges frosted white, its inner surface gleaming faintly with phosphor paint. Through the glass, the invisible became visible, silhouettes gliding through the grey, disciplined, precise. He whispered to Hart. They're fanning left, 3 squads, centre element carrying satchel charges. Hart's breath came fast. Orders? Merrick's eyes stayed on the scope. Same as always. Hart frowned. Which ones? Theirs or ours? Mine. Crack. The sound rolled through the valley like a whip. Below, the lead scout jerked, arms flailing, vanishing into the fog. For 2 seconds, no one moved. Then the whispering began. German shouts, sharp and confused. Tracers sliced the mist. Blind red fire searching for an enemy they couldn't see. Merrick reloaded, his hands calm. Crack! Another muzzle flash. Another body dropped. Hart covered his ears as bullets tore chunks from the stone wall above them. They're returning fire! They're guessing, Merrick said. Keep it that way. Joe won 45 hours. The Germans advanced, not retreating, not yet believing what was happening. They threw flares high into the fog, trying to burn the night away. The sky burst in white fire, then instantly smothered by cloud. Merrick used it. Every flare turned the mist into a mirror. Through his lens, the reflected light outlined every helmet, every breath plume, every shadow with silver clarity. Hart couldn't see anything, but Merrick could see everything. He whispered corrections to himself, the same way his father had taught him to adjust curvature while grinding glass. Half-inch low, quarter left drift, wind nil, exhale. Crack, crack. 2 more fell, precise, surgical, inevitable. Hart risked a glance. How the hell do you even... Light behaves, Merrick muttered, if you know how to ask it. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was seconds. Time had broken. The German line disintegrated into chaos. Commanders shouted. Men stumbled into one another. Machine guns fired at phantoms. From the ridges above, American sentries woke to the sound of war. The valley erupted with answering fire. Tracers burned downward like red rain. Lieutenant Donnelly stumbled into the observation post, shouting over the gunfire. Merrick, what the hell have you done? Merrick didn't look away from the scope. Stopped them. You disobeyed direct orders. Would you prefer we wait until they finish climbing? A mortar round exploded 50 yards down slope, shaking the walls. Shrapnel clattered off helmets. Donnelly ducked, screaming, You'll hang for this! Merrick fired again. Maybe, but at least you'll live long enough to see it. 2 Hunkook hours. The Germans regrouped for one last push. 40 men charging uphill through fog, hoping to overrun the outpost by sheer will. Merrick switched to rapid fire. Each shot was measured, mechanical, methodical. Crack, crack, crack. Every trigger pull felt like another page of history being rewritten. Hart fed him clips, voice trembling. That's half a company! They were, Merrick said, reloading. Not anymore. One German machine gun team reached within 50 yards. Hart froze. He could see the muzzle flashes now, wild and orange. Merrick breathed out, adjusted, fired. Both gunners fell, one instantly, the other clutching his throat. Then, silence again. The surviving Germans broke. Shadows scattered into the fog, leaving the valley littered with the still. 2 hours. Merrick lowered his rifle, his shoulder bruised, his hands numb. Smoke drifted from the barrel like breath. The canteen lens was cracked, a thin fracture running through the center, but still glowing faintly. Hart exhaled shakily. "You're out of your damn mind." "Probably," Merrick said, wiping condensation from his scope. "But I can live with that." They sat in silence, listening. The fog thinned slightly. Below, the valley glimmered faintly. Bodies scattered in silver frost, weapons half buried in snow. Hart's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we tell command?" "The truth," Merrick said, "if they can handle it." 03 Hunter hours. By now, the rest of the company had joined the defense. Mortars pounded retreating Germans. The bridge at the valley floor stood untouched. Lieutenant Donnelly limped back into the bunker, face pale. "Battalion just radioed in. You broke an entire assault formation." Merrick didn't answer. He was staring at the cracked lens, turning it in the lamplight. Donnelly hesitated. "They're asking how you saw them coming." Merrick shrugged. "Moonlight." "Moonlight?" Donnelly repeated, incredulous. Merrick smiled faintly. "Sometimes, sir, that's all you need." 0420 hours. The firing stopped. The fog began to rise with the first hint of dawn. The silence that returned was different now, not waiting, but exhausted. Merrick stepped outside into the snow, rifle slung across his shoulder. The eastern sky bled pale pink behind black ridges. The valley below looked like a frozen battlefield from another world, still, solemn, eternal. He took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, he could see the horizon. Hart joined him, arms folded, staring down. "You realize this is going in a report that'll bury you?" Merrick nodded. "Maybe, but it'll also remind someone that the dark isn't what kills us." Hart frowned. "What does?" "Fear of it." As the sun crested, a gust of wind carried the faint smell of gunpowder and pine. Merrick reached into his coat, pulled out the cracked canteen lens, and held it toward the light. The fracture caught the sunrise, scattering it into tiny rainbows. He smiled, tired, hollow, but proud. He whispered to himself, "Still works." December 21st, 1944. Morning. The valley steamed. Shell holes exhaled faint ribbons of smoke. The snow around them was pink and grey. The sun was rising weakly through a torn sheet of cloud, pale and unimpressed. Corporal Isaac Merrick sat on an ammo crate outside the ruined farmhouse. His rifle lay across his knees, bolt open, barrel still warm to the touch. The cracked lens caught a shard of light and threw it back into his eyes. He squinted, half blind, half proud. Private Hart trudged up the slope carrying 2 helmets. "Counting bodies," he muttered. 47. None of ours." Merrick didn't answer. He was listening to the new silence, the kind that comes only after men stop screaming. "That's the sound of paper being written somewhere," he said finally. "Reports, statements, charges." Hart sat beside him. "You saved an entire battalion. They can't charge you for that." Merrick looked at the cracked lens. "They can charge me for how I did it." By 0700 hours, a jeep climbed the mountain road, chains rattling over ice. Out stepped Major Samuel Crane, collar turned up against the wind, and 2 clerks carrying clipboards. Behind them, Lieutenant Donnelly looked like a man walking to confession. Crane surveyed the ridge. Burned snow, spent brass, German bodies sprawled like broken mannequins. He said nothing for a full minute, then, "Lieutenant, explain." Donnelly swallowed. "Enemy infiltration at 0130 hours. Corporal Merrick engaged without orders. We returned fire and held the line." Crane's gaze moved to Merrick. "You started this?" "Yes, sir." "You were told not to?" "Yes, sir." Crane stepped closer. "You aware that violating standing engagement protocol carries court-martial under Section 47? "Yes, sir." Crane studied him a long moment. "Then tell me why I'm not looking at 50 of my own dead men right now." Merrick opened the pouch, handed over the lens. The Major took it gingerly, half canteen, half miracle, edges scorched, Resin bubbled, faint phosphorescence still pulsing. It looked ridiculous in his gloved hand. "What is this?" Crane asked. "Canteen metal, Jeep glass, camera film and phosphor paint," Merrick said. "Ben's Moonlight. Lets you see contrast through fog." Crane tilted it, watching sunlight fracture across the crack. "You made this?" "Yes, sir." "Against regulations?" "Yes, sir." "And it works?" "Yes, sir." Crane exhaled, breath white in the air. "You realize this belongs in an evidence locker, not an arsenal." Merrick met his eyes. "It belongs wherever men need to see." Interrogation hut. 0900 hours. Inside, the air stank of coffee and cordite. A clerk typed every word. Merrick sat opposite Crane and Donnelly, cap off, uniform stained with smoke. Crane said, "You disobeyed direct orders, modified government property, and fired without authorization." "Yes, sir." "And you claim you prevented an enemy breakthrough of—" He checked the report. "Approximately 120 men." "Yes, sir." Donnelly cleared his throat. "Sir, I can confirm their movement. He saw them before anyone else could." Crane's eyes flicked to him. "So the lieutenant condones insubordination now?" Donnelly hesitated. "I condone results." Crane drummed his fingers on the table. "You're both lucky the brass in Florence likes good headlines. They're calling it the Miracle on Hill 641. You'll get your picture in the Stars and Stripes. But make no mistake, Corporal, miracles are still subject to review." Merrick asked quietly, "What happens to the lens?" "Confiscated for analysis," Crane said. "You'll receive acknowledgement if it proves useful." "In other words," Merrick said, "it disappears." Crane's mouth twitched. "Innovation requires sacrifice." Merrick smiled without humour. "So does ignorance." Crane closed the folder. "You're dismissed. And Merrick—" He paused at the door. "You ever build anything like that again? At least have the decency to let me see it first." Outside. Later. Snow was falling again, light and slow. Hart waited by the jeep, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Well?" Merrick shrugged. "We're heroes, and I'm under unofficial investigation." Hart grinned. "That's army logic." Merrick looked back toward the hut. "They'll bury it. The idea, the lens, maybe even the report." "Maybe," Hart said, "but word gets around. Guys talk. You can't bury what half the division saw last night." Merrick considered that. "No," he said softly. "You can't." He took the cracked canteen from his pocket. He'd swapped it for a clean one in the supply tent, leaving them the decoy. The original glowed faintly when it caught the snowlight. He turned it in his hand, whispered, "Still bends." Hart asked, "What?" "Nothing," Merrick said. "Just physics." They climbed into the jeep. The engine coughed to life. Behind them, the ridge was disappearing again under fog, like the mountain itself was covering up the evidence. Later that week, Regimental Headquarters, Florence. In a storage room lined with crates marked Ordnance. Experimental, a clerk labelled a box. Optical device. Unauthorized. Source unknown. Inside lay Merrick's canteen lens, wrapped in brown paper, still faintly glowing. The clerk looked at it once, muttered, "Weird damn flashlight," and sealed the lid. Above the entry form, Major Crane scrawled in pen, "Hold for technical evaluation." Then, under his breath, "Maybe the kids saw something the rest of us didn't." Field Hospital, 2 days later. Merrick visited wounded men from neighbouring companies, those who'd slept through the battle, unaware how close they'd come to dying. One sergeant gripped his hand and said, "Heard you saw 'em before they saw you. You saved my boys." Merrick smiled, uneasy. "Just doing my job." The sergeant shook his head. "Your job was to wait. Good thing you didn't. That night, Merrick sat outside the tent, watching snow fall under moonlight. He had nothing left of the lens except the idea. But ideas travel fast in war. Already, other snipers were asking about that canteen trick. Some carved their own, most failed. But a few swore they could see shapes in the fog. Merrick said nothing. Let the story grow. Let the darkness wonder what else the Americans could see. Spring 1945, northern Italy. The war moved north, then east, and finally stopped moving at all. By the time the surrender came, Merrick's unit was a ghost of itself. New faces, fewer jokes, different commanders. Hill 641 had become a coordinate on a map no one visited anymore. When the order to stand down arrived, Merrick cleaned his rifle one last time, removed the cracked backup lens he'd kept hidden, and dropped it into the Po River. It flashed once in the current, caught the sunlight, and vanished. He whispered, "You did your part." 1946. Chicago, Illinois. Merrick returned home to a city humming with victory parades and neon lights. He enrolled at the University of Chicago on the GI Bill, majoring in optical engineering. In the evenings, he worked in his uncle's pawn shop, repairing broken binoculars and cameras. Glass everywhere, lenses stacked like trophies of patience. A professor once asked him during a lab exercise, "Why optics, after everything you've seen?" Merrick smiled faintly, "Because I still don't like the dark." 1949. He patented a low-light hunting scope made from recycled Canteen metal. A small, practical design that let moonlight pass through layered glass without glare. It sold modestly to hunters and photographers. The patent office filed it under recreational equipment. He didn't mind. He'd stopped expecting recognition from men in uniforms. 1956. Arlington, Virginia. A letter arrived from the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. "We have reviewed field reports from the European theatre concerning an improvised optical enhancement device recovered near Florence, Italy. Some components appear consistent with your patent. Could you confirm authorship?" Merrick read the letter twice, then laughed quietly. He wrote back one sentence. "The light bends the same, no matter who holds the glass." They never replied. 1968. Television interview. A local reporter, doing a segment on veteran inventors, asked him, "Do you ever think about that night?" Merrick hesitated. "I think about the ones who didn't make it to morning. The lens just let me see them before the darkness did. Was it worth breaking the rules?" He looked straight into the camera. "If rules keep you blind, you're already lost." The station cut that line before airing. 1983. Fort Belvoir, Virginia. In a secure lab belonging to the U.S. Army Night Vision Directorate, an engineer unpacked an old crate labeled Ordnance, Experimental, Source Unknown. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, lay the glowing Canteen lens. The engineer examined it, frowned, then smiled. "Crude," he said, "but brilliant." He typed a note into the archive. "Field innovation consistent with early low-light amplification principles. Provenance: Corporal I. Merrick, 1944. For the first time in 40 years, the record had a name. 1990, Chicago. Merrick, now 69, sat in his small workshop above a corner grocery, adjusting spectacles for neighborhood kids. His hands still trembled from the cold that never really left his bones. A young reporter interviewing him for a veterans column asked, "Do you ever wish they'd recognized you back then?" Merrick chuckled. "They did, eventually. They just didn't know it." He pointed to the boy's glasses. "Those lenses? Same principle. Controlled reflection. Better sight." The boy blinked behind them. "So you invented seeing in the dark?" Merrick smiled. "No, son. I just refused to stop looking." 2001. Posthumous recognition. The U.S. Army Optical Research Center dedicated a new testing range to Corporal Isaac Merrick. A plaque at the entrance read, "He broke regulations and the darkness. Hill 641, December 1944. Visitors walking the exhibit still whisper about the artifact under glass, a battered canteen with a fractured lens glowing faintly in the dim light. Narrator's closing reflection. In every war, there are soldiers who follow orders and those who follow light. Corporal Isaac Merrick didn't invent night vision. He invented the courage to believe it was possible. His outlawed canteen lens never appeared in the manuals or the medals, but its ghost lives inside every device that lets a soldier see the unseen. The question his story leaves us with is simple and eternal. When the rules tell you to stop looking, do you obey? Or do you find a way to see anyway? Because history rarely remembers the obedient. It remembers the ones who aimed into the dark and refused to blink. If this story moved you, share it. Tell someone that innovation doesn't always wear rank, and that courage sometimes looks like a cracked piece of glass held against the moon. Remember Isaac Merrick, the man who bent Moonlight until it fought back.